Welcome to episode 284 of Angela Watson's Truth for Teachers. I'm your host, Angela Watson, and I'm here to speak encouragement into the hearts of educators and get you informed and energized for the week ahead. Today, I'm doing an AMA episode in which listeners can ask me anything about my personal or professional life. Visit truthforteachers.com for an easy-to-read, easy-to-share version of this podcast episode. If you have a side hustle as a tutor, coach, or any other business that requires clients who need to book appointments and pay for services, check out practice.do. Practice.do is the simplest platform I've found for streamlining everything from scheduling, reminder messages, invoicing, and record keeping. It's perfect for teachers who tutor and want to keep all communication and payments in one easy, professional-looking tool for themselves and their clients. Truth for Teachers listeners can try Practice free for 7 days and get 50% off their first 3 months using the code TEACHERS. Learn more at practice.do. This is my wrap-up for the 3-part summer series I did celebrating 20 years of sharing teaching ideas online and how I've grown and how my work has grown over that time period. So in the final episode of that 3-part series, I included a link to an anonymous Google form for folks to submit questions about things that I didn't answer in the series that you're curious about. And your questions that you submitted were absolutely wonderful, thought-provoking, deep, exactly the types of things that I love to talk about. So thank you for that. Thank you for bringing up some super interesting topics for me to discuss. And that's what I'll do here in this episode, and I'll dive right in here with the first question. This person asks, if it's not too personal, I wondered about your infertility journey. I remember praying for you when you shared about it before. Having gone through IVF myself, I know it may be too sensitive, and I respect that. So yes, I had shared on the podcast when my husband and I were trying to get pregnant, and we were seeing a fertility specialist. And I think I've mentioned a couple times that we're no longer trying. I'm 45 now. But I don't think I ever really explained what had happened. When I think about everything that I shared with you in this podcast series over the summer, it seems like that would be something major that comes up, right? Like, it was really interesting for me trying to craft a narrative about my life and my work and what to include and what to leave out. And this seems like a really big thing that would have somehow made it in, but because it's not integral to my story, I mean, obviously, if we had a child, that would be an important part of the story. But because it didn't happen that way, I actually didn't even think to include it. So I was really glad to see this question. And I appreciate the people who were sending me, positive vibes and praying for us and encouraging us during that time. So this is my perception of the whole thing as of right now. And again, that could change. But as of right now, I don't think of myself as being either childless or child-free. And I think there are people who put themselves in either camp. Childless kind of implies that you want to have a child and you have not yet, or you didn't get to. And there's a sense that that was something that you deeply wanted to have. Child-free folks are people who don't have children by choice. This was not something they ever wanted to do. And they like the positive framing of that, that I'm not less than, I'm not missing anything. I'm child-free. And I feel like neither one of those really describes me, because for me, it wasn't so much a decision that I made, but it is something that I feel positive about, that I'm happy about. I'm glad that it worked out the way that it did. And I don't feel like I'm missing anything. In retrospect, when I look back at the timing of when we were trying to get pregnant, I would have had a toddler during the early days of the pandemic. And, folks who know me well through this podcast know that 2020 was extremely stressful for me because we are based in New York City, and it was a true life or death crisis in Brooklyn. Like, it was very traumatic and really impacted the way of life. And we lost a lot of friends and family members in the early days of COVID. So thinking about what that would have been like to have like a 1-year-old and to not be able to travel not be able to have a nanny or a babysitter or a daycare, any kind of support, to have it just be me and my husband. And my husband was out of work for a good year and a half because he works in the music industry. He owns an entertainment company and he's a musician. And, live music was not happening for a good year or more in New York. It's still, I think, it's never going to be the same as what it was. It's still been a transition. So I think about what that would have been like, the financial strain, the not having the support and the help, particularly since, I never wanted to be a stay-at-home mom. It was never my goal to focus only on raising a child. Like, I always wanted to work. I had always, when we were trying to get pregnant, I envisioned having someone come to our apartment and take care of the baby, maybe from 7 or 8 in the morning until noon. So I could go someplace and I could work and then come back in the afternoon and be there. So, I don't think that would have been possible during COVID, or it would have been very risky. And I look back now and I'm just like that I think that worked out for the best. So what ended up happening was we did 10 rounds of IUI, intrauterine fertilization. And they were like, okay, at this point, you're almost 40 and you really should switch to IVF at this point. And so I took some time to think about it. And, the IUI was just extremely stressful. The whole, anyone who has been through this journey, and this particular listener has, it's just, it turns your whole world upside down. And, it's one thing to turn your world upside down for a child, if you actually get to have the kid. It's another thing to turn your world upside down and not get the kid out of it. And even just not having caffeine for 2 weeks out of every month, the 2 weeks that I might have been pregnant. I mean, I need my coffee badly. And so every single month I'm limiting my caffeine intake, and then, I'm not pregnant. And so then I kind of did it for nothing. And then I wonder, was it something else that I did? Should I have maybe cut this out? Or maybe I did have that cup of coffee that day. And is this my fault? It was just so much. So we took a little break. And those 10 rounds weren't back to back either. I think that was over the course of about a year and a half or so. And then when it was time to do the IVF, if you're not familiar with that process, it's much more invasive. This is when they are going to harvest your eggs and, and then have to re-implant an embryo back into you later. It's much more invasive and way more expensive. It's a huge financial commitment. Our insurance did not cover it. So, when it was time to do it, every single time I needed to call to schedule the appointment, to start doing the shots and start going through everything that I needed to do, I would just start weeping. My body was just saying, no, this is not the right step. I physically could not bring myself to do it. Mentally, I wanted to try, and my husband wanted to try. But I physically could not do it. And I had to listen to my body. My body's message was, this is just not the right step. And this is just sort of going too far. If it was meant to be, it would have happened the other way for us. Certainly, I'm not saying that for everyone. I think if you really want a kid, you're going to do whatever it takes to get that kid. And certainly we could have tried surrogacy. We could have tried adoption. But what it came down to was me feeling like I didn't want it that bad. I just didn't want it that bad. I really like my life. And, I'm happy in my marriage. I'm happy in our lifestyle. I'm happy in our work. And, if we had conceived, without me having to go through all of those steps, I'm sure I would have been super happy. But did I want to put myself through all of that and still not even know if it was going to work? And yeah, my body said no. That's really what it came down to, was that my body said no. And also at this time, as I said, I just turned 40, and that was a pretty pivotal time for me in a way that I hadn't planned. But I felt like it started shifting my priorities a little bit and made me think more about enjoying what I had, paying attention to the changes that were happening in my body and working with them, And the idea of shooting myself full of hormones to stop my natural ovulation and induce an artificial ovulation in order to have it timed right for the IVF cycles and everything is like, this to me was the opposite of everything else that I was trying to do health-wise. I was trying to really listen to my body's signals. When do I need to eat? What do I need to eat? When do I need to sleep? How much do I need to sleep? Like I was trying to really listen to my body during that time. And this, for me, felt like the opposite. So my husband, to his credit, said, I would like to try. I think we should do IVF, but it's your body. And if you don't want to do it, I support you. And I remember telling him, if you really want to have a baby, like I don't want to keep you from that. When we got married, that was our goal. We had decided on that together, that we would have a family. And now I've decided that like, I'm not willing to do what that takes in order to make that happen. Like neither one of us ever envisioned that it would get all the way to IVF or surrogacy or adoption. And I'm just not willing to do it. And I said, if you want to find another partner, I don't want to keep you from having the life that you planned. And he was like, are you kidding me, Angela? Like, are you crazy? Why would you even say that? I'm like, I don't know. I'm just telling you. Like, I don't ever want to be the reason that you didn't get to live the dream that you wanted. And he was like, no, I want you. I want you and you are my family. And we can be happy with just us and our cat. And we are. And we are. So that's why I say I'm neither childless nor child-free. And I think another piece of it is that I never made a final decision that we will never have kids. Because during that time, that was a very hard thing to think about, was to let go of all of those dreams, of what our life would be like with a child, at least one child. I mean, I'm an only kid. So, for me, having one kid, that fits enough of a vision. Like I didn't know if we would have multiple. I had no idea, but I had to let go of all of those dreams. And for me, it was easier to say, actually, I don't know the future. I can never say for sure that we will never have a child. I could get pregnant without even meaning to. We could have a young person in our family who, gets pregnant as a young teen and they can't take care of it and they want to give the baby up for adoption, and we might adopt that child. Like, who knows what kind of situation could ever happen in which we become parents. And there's so many different ways to be a mom or a dad or an uncle or an aunt, and, to be a figure in a child's life. So for me, it was very helpful to not think, okay, we're never having kids. I'm never going to be a mom. I don't like making declarations like that. It felt sad to me at the time. It doesn't feel sad now, but that's just sort of where I landed. So I guess that's maybe another reason I never really talked about it in the podcast, because it wasn't like we made a decision that we will never have kids. It was more like we're going to let it be what it is, and if it's meant to be, then the opportunity will come along and we'll know that it's right. And that will be our child in whatever form that may be. And I think we're still open to that, and it could be a teenager. It may not even be a baby. It could be a teen, that we end up fostering and adopting or anything. So again, nothing that we're actively pursuing. It's nothing that I feel like I'm missing in my life, but I don't ever want to close a door on something that, that might be the right path. So yes. So I had a lot more to say about that than I thought I did. That's my infertility journey. Okay. So the next question says, your message about how the train was leaving the station. And this is in reference to episode 212. It was at the beginning of 2021, called The Train is Leaving the Station. Are you on board? And this is the question about it. Your message about how the train was leaving the station. You can't keep waiting to convince everyone to go with you, and you're just going to move forward with what you thought was right, has really stuck with me. Maybe more so than anything else you've ever said. And I've been following you since 2003, which, by the way, amazing. This is a person who has been there for the full 20 years that I've been sharing ideas online. Okay, back to the question. The person writes, it's really been impactful on my life because I cared way too much about making sure every possible person would be happy with every possible thing I did. I've been wondering, what were the repercussions of that episode? Did you have a drop in followers, angry emails, anything like that? So the idea in this episode was that we don't try to convince everybody to do what we're doing. We organize with like-minded folks. We welcome them on the train as it begins to fill up, and we use that to move forward toward the direction we want to go in. So this train analogy I was using is about the single-minded focus on getting to the destination, hopefully picking up more people at each consecutive stop, but rolling on regardless. And this was in the context of, just how divided our country is, how also just people's differences. You want people to get on board with a good idea or a proposal or a school reform, and just not everybody is there. Keep moving forward. The train is leaving the station. It's the all aboard last call, and we can pick up more people later, but we're not going to stand around the train station arguing with everybody and trying to persuade them to come with us. They can catch a later train if they want to, or they can catch a train going in the opposite direction, but we're going to keep going forward. So did I have any pushback, drop in followers, etc.? Not really that I remember. I think there were a few, but they were replaced by new folks who share the vision. And there really wasn't very much fallout from me announcing that. I said it on the podcast, and I also sent it out to my email list. And I think that is the beauty of a podcast and long form content like email versus the hot takes on social media, which is what I talked about in the last part of the series. When I said that, my words were only heard by those who care enough to queue up the episode and listen to what I have to say when they're in the headspace to actually listen. And I think that makes a big difference, right? They're not just relaxing and scrolling on Instagram and suddenly they see this strong opinion that they may not agree with. They didn't ask to see. They weren't in the mood to see. They weren't, mentally prepared to see. Or maybe just people who don't know anything about me and just had an algorithm push the post into their feed. And now they're just like interjecting into the conversation. So I feel like choosing to do it via the podcast and then letting my email list know, hey, go listen to the podcast or read this longer blog post, I think really helped. And I think had I just, said something like that in, 280 characters on Twitter or X or whatever it is that we're calling it now, it may have been a little different. But no, I feel like people liked that analogy. They got that analogy. And I think certainly if anyone, educators understand you are not going to get everyone to agree with you. You're just not. You cannot please all the stakeholders. You have to have a vision. You have to have a clear vision. You have to have reasons for your vision. It has to be well thought out. You have to be able to defend, if needed, what you're doing and why. You have to be able to explain it. And you have to believe in it deeply yourself. Because if you're going to take the hit for something, you don't want to take a hit for something that you didn't really think through very well. You want to really know where you stand. And I feel like that's where I was at. And the things that, that I'm not sure about, like when I talked about religion in this podcast, I don't think that what I believe today is what I'm going to believe a few years from now. Pretty clear about that too, that I want to be open to growing and changing and, changing my mind. Like it's rare that I feel like I have really strong opinions about something that I don't think may change later or may evolve as I learn new information. And, trying to see that as a good thing, that, that's what wise people do. You receive new information and you're open to changing your mind based on that new information. You're not locked into something. So, so that's where we are with that episode. It was overall very positive impact that I think it inspired other people to think about what train they're boarding and what direction they're heading in and, what ideas and movements do they want other people to come along with, and who are those people that they're riding with? Who are the people who are sharing in that vision, moving in the same direction as them, and really focusing on them rather than all of the people who are, standing around at the train station arguing. So the next question says, have you done any work with the Enneagram system? In the last few years, I've heard you speak in a way that sounds as though you may have. If so, I would love to hear about it. I have done work with the Enneagram, and lately I've kind of gotten back into it as well. Suzanne Stable, I'm not exactly sure how to say her name. She was on Glennon Doyle's podcast recently, and so that kind of got me thinking about it a little bit more. And I've read a couple different books on it in terms of how it can impact relationships. So yeah, I find it really helpful because what the Enneagram does is Suzanne says we all do more or less the same behaviors, but we're doing them for different reasons. And I feel like the Enneagram is a really useful tool for figuring out like what is your driving motivation. So my Enneagram number is 4, with a wing of 3. The 3 is the achiever. So that's the part of me that is like wanting to do and produce and, is sort of driven. But I am a 4, which is the individualist. Some people call it the romantic, which is not necessarily like a relationship romance, but more like romanticizing your life, like Anne of Green Gables type. So 4s are tend to be melancholy, sort of brooding, ruminating, wistful, liking the bittersweet moments of life more than pure happiness, because a bittersweet feeling is more complex. It's deeper than just like a surface level happiness. And 4s like depth. 4s have no tolerance for anything surface level, anything mundane. Like, don't pull me out of my imagination to make me do paperwork. That's like the worst thing you can do. Like, I'm in the middle of like creating something, imagining something, experiencing something wonderful. And I have to like think about filing my taxes or something. Like, that's the worst for a 4. 4s really seek out the beauty and awe and wonder in the ordinary. It's like we can find the magic, the sacred, the divine in anything, like we can make anything special. And that's our driving force is finding things that are unique, and making things special, basically. So yeah, so I'm a 4 if you're into Enneagram. If you're into Myers-Briggs, I'm an INFJ. I haven't really looked into Myers-Briggs in a long time, so I won't, it's not fresh in my head. I won't speak to that, but yeah, INFJ. If you're into astrology, which I'm not really, but I'll just mention it here. I'm a Gemini, and I do think that I have some characteristics that Geminis are said to have. Geminis are the twin sign. They have the 2 sides to everything, and can be pulled in different directions and can feel like they have 2 different personalities. I can relate to some of that in some ways. Then I got 3 questions on very similar topics. So these were the 3 questions. One person asked, how does being an empath impact your work? Can you explain with some examples? One person said, as an introvert and empath myself, happily married but no kids, I found it hard to make friends in the teaching world. Many teachers are strong personalities who either don't seem to understand or relate to me, or I feel drained by. Any tips for introverts and empaths regarding surviving and thriving in teaching? And the third similar question was, you talked about how as an introvert and empathetic person, you have to find ways to get energy from your students instead of it just being a drain. Would you share some? I related to this immensely and wanted to hear more. So I'll talk about my own experience here now, and then I'll do a whole future episode with tips and advice for other HSPs, since this seemed to be something that a lot of people are wondering about. And I'm not surprised, right? Because that is my personality. I think other people who are like me are drawn to me. And there's so much education content that is created by people who are not like that, people who are very high energy or extroverted, outgoing. They like to get the kids excited about things and pumped up and I don't know. It's a totally different kind of personality type and way of moving throughout the world that I feel like a lot of education stuff is geared toward. And if you are a person who is highly sensitive, then you're gonna have different needs and preferences. So I'll do a whole episode on that actually, and I'll see if I can get someone to come on and talk about it who has some expertise in that area. But when I talk about being an empath or being a highly sensitive person, an empath is someone who can understand and feel other people's emotions, whether they want to or not. Empaths will absorb other people's emotions. It can be hard to tell what you're feeling, or like, am I feeling this? Or is it the person that I'm talking to is feeling this? And now I'm feeling that way because they are that way. So they are angry or they're sad. And now I feel angry or sad. Because I've been around them, I'm absorbed their emotions. Meanwhile, there's nothing in my life that I'm angry about or sad about, but because they were, I've taken that on. And so it's sort of like a boundary issue, because a person who's not an empath can feel empathy, certainly can understand that person's anger or that person's sadness, but they don't take it on themselves. And that's sort of the difference there. Especially during conflict. A lot of empaths are conflict avoidant because when you're in conflict with someone you're both experiencing and displaying strong emotions, and they may be diametrically opposed. And that's a lot to carry. How do you carry your strong feeling and then also carry the other person's opposite strong feeling? So that's been something I've really had to work on. And my husband, back to the Enneagram, is an 8, which is the challenger. Challengers are the people who thrive on getting a rise out of people. They love, I don't want to say conflict, but more like, let's say how we really feel. Let's have strong opinions. Let's state our opinions. Let's defend them. If we're having a dinner with friends or family or something, and everybody's just talking about shallow stuff like the weather, he'll say something inflammatory just to kind of get people passionate, just to get people excited and feeling something and doing something. And so, we kind of vibe in that way. And that, I also don't like shallow conversations as an Enneagram 4. I want to stay in the area of depth, but I don't like the conflict. I don't like other people to feel uncomfortable because I can feel their emotions. So it's been interesting. It's been interesting, but I've learned how to feel conflict as a good thing, and to not take on the other person's emotions or their feelings as my own responsibility. So that's a little bit about the empath part. Empaths also tend to need nature, like they replenish themselves in nature, and they can have a tough time with crowds. Then there's the highly sensitive person thing. So, by the way, when I say empath, a lot of scientists and social scientists don't even really believe that's a real thing. But an HSP, a highly sensitive person, is a psychological term. It's something that is recognized, and these are people who are more sensitive than maybe neurotypical folks to sounds, to maybe light, sensations. Just can easily be overstimulated by things happening in the environment. And, as much as there are drawbacks with these things, higher sensitivity is also linked with creativity, with richer personal relationships, a greater appreciation for beauty, which again ties in with the Enneagram 4. Like, when you're deeply impacted by your surroundings, that means when you have beautiful surroundings, natural surroundings, if I'm outside by trees or mountains or water, like I feel like I feel that on a level that a lot of other people don't seem to be feeling it. Like they look around and think, oh, that's nice. If they really even notice, they may be more focused on the conversation that they're having or something else. But like for me, I notice the light. I notice the smells. I notice the sounds. Like I'm just very in tune to all of that. So when I'm in an environment like in a school, it can be extremely, overstimulating. In my classroom, I never turned on the overhead fluorescent lights. Fluorescent lights to me are like the worst thing ever. If I had to spend 8, 9, 10 hours a day in a room with fluorescent lights, I would lose my mind. So I kept them off. I went to IKEA and bought a whole bunch of cheap lamps of different colors and just like soft, gentle lighting and put it everywhere basically. And kept the blinds all the way open, of course, for the windows. So we get all that natural light in and we can look outside. And, I think it kept the kids calm. The kids never complained. And I would ask them sometimes, like, should we turn on the lights? Can you see, like, is there any kind of issue? And I think they enjoyed it. I think they liked the break from it too. But like, I always kept the classroom darker, like never overhead lights. In my house, never overhead lights, always soft, gentle lamps. I like to have calming music on. So in my classroom, I had special playlists of classical music or, soft jazz, no big loud trumpets in the middle of the jazz song, but something like very mellow, instrumental. I still like that kind of music now. So like, that kind of environment for me would really help offset the noise and the energy of having, 30 kids in the room. Just having softer lighting and like this calming music really kind of helped a lot. So the other piece of advice that's sort of related to my own experience with this is just paying attention to my own needs and the needs for self-care. Because if you are a highly sensitive person, you are not going to need the same thing as other people. Like I can imagine that there are many teachers who never thought twice about fluorescent lights in their room. Like it just never even occurred to them. Like, yeah, I'm going to walk in and flip on the light switch and I'm going to go throughout my day. And it never bothered them. It was never something they cared about. So if you are highly sensitive, and that is something that you're sensitive to is light, then you're going to have to pay attention to those needs and look for ways to meet them. And I think probably an example of the most common way that I do this, when I'm in very stimulating environments, is I walk away a lot. If I'm in a group setting, if I'm in a highly charged conversation, even one that I'm really enjoying, anytime I'm around a whole lot of people, I walk away a lot. I will just step over to a window, or better yet, go outside and just breathe. Just have a think, have a minute to myself. And usually other people don't even notice. They just assume I left to go to the bathroom, I went to go take a phone call or something like that. I'm just gone for like a minute or so and I come back. Or I may, if we have people over and there's like a lot of like loud conversations or something, I may go into the kitchen and make myself a cup of tea. Say, does anybody want something to drink? And then I'll go in there and like make drinks for everyone. So that's a couple minutes where I'm not expected to engage in the conversation, and I can kind of like get my thoughts together, and I'm looking out the window while I'm making the tea and just sort of like, recentering myself and grounding back into who I am. And then I've got the tea, and I can go, and this is like another, sort of pleasant sensory experience, right? Like the tea is calming and relaxing and then helps me enter this more boisterous conversation that we have. So it's really little things like that. I don't think it's something that other people would necessarily notice. It's more about what's going on internally inside of you. And just making sure you're not letting things get to a point where, you're sort of past the place where you can self-regulate. Because if I don't do those things and I try to just be like everyone else is just fine with this loud music and the loud conversations and like, think about like a noisy sports bar or something like that. That kind of environment, I can't do very well in there. And if I try to stay for too long and I don't pay attention, then I may have less energy the next day. Or I may just end up getting like very agitated. Or I'll notice like if anything goes wrong, I don't have the capacity to handle it. So like, let's say it's time to pay and I can't find my credit card or something, I'll panic. Like I'll go into sort of like an anxiety spiral because I'm so overstimulated, I can't handle anything else. So it's up to me to pay attention to those needs and to make sure that those needs are met so that I can function in those kinds of situations. So I do have a couple episodes already on introversion as a teacher, on a couple other things related to this. So I'll put that in the show notes. And then, like I said, I'll do a whole episode on tips for highly sensitive educators. The next question is, do you have any advice for teachers who struggle with anxiety and depression? And did you struggle with either of those things as a teacher? I love your work and appreciate your perspective so much. I'm also an introvert and a highly sensitive person, and sometimes I don't think I'm cut out for this career because of my personality and my mental health struggles. So yes, I have struggled with anxiety and depression, particularly in 2020, and I've done 1 or 2 podcast episodes about that. I will link to those in the show notes. I also wrote about it in the 2nd edition of Awakened, Change Your Mindset to Transform Your Teaching, and talked about those diagnoses and how medication also works alongside with mindset work for me. And I realized after I did my 3-part podcast series this summer that I didn't talk about my mental health, I don't think, which is another example of how it's really impossible to craft a whole narrative about your life and tell everything, because you can see how long this is going on already, right? And I've still only sort of scratched the surface. So, somehow, I guess because it's not something that is top of mind right now, it just didn't make it in. But absolutely, that has impacted my entire story going all the way back to the beginning. So the short version of it is I have a history of bipolar disorder on one side of my family. I have a history of anxiety on another side of the family. So definitely I don't know exactly what the current research says in terms of how much of this is genetic. If there is a genetic component, which I think there probably is, I definitely have those genes, particularly for bipolar disorder. I was first diagnosed myself with bipolar disorder. I sort of self-diagnosed because there's not really, there's not like a blood test they can do. They can't really tell this. It's based a lot on what the patient describes. And because, I have family members who have this, I recognize the behavior and I saw it in myself, and I sort of, I think, pushed the diagnosis in that way. But this was during my 3rd year of teaching. So I was young. I was, maybe 24, 25. And yeah, I went through a sort of dark period, and I don't think there was anything going on in my life, which is how I knew that it was something else was going on. It wasn't like something traumatic had happened or I was going through a particularly stressful time. My life was pretty stable. I was in a healthy relationship. I had friends. I liked where I was living. I enjoyed my job. Like things were pretty good in my life, but I ended up taking off an entire month of teaching in my third year due to mental health issues. Um, I had a substitute in my class, and um, because this was so long ago, and this is like 20 years ago, I don't remember a whole lot of the details from it. But I came back and I felt better. And the biggest thing that came out of that was when I came back, I told my principal why I was taking off. And when I came back, she said, your students thrived while you were gone. I couldn't even tell that you weren't there. You had taught them those routines so well that they just continued on even without you. They had so internalized that the ways of learning and the ways of moving through the classroom, they kept doing it even with the sub. And I think that comment really shaped a lot of the work that I ended up doing, because I wanted that for every teacher. I wanted every teacher to feel like they could leave, like they could take a whole month off from the classroom and come back and there would still be learning taking place. And, for context, I was teaching Head Start at this time. So this was 3 and 4-year-olds. This is preschoolers in a special education school with autism inclusion. So I had an aide in my room who was there with the autism inclusion students. That was the teaching context. And sure enough, I came back and, things weren't exactly how I would have liked them to be. But, the kids were still coming in the morning and hanging up their backpacks and coming over to the rug and getting a book and reading quietly together. Like they knew what to do and they were in charge of their learning. It wasn't just because I was there telling them what to do. And that was a really profound experience for me because I didn't know what I was going to come back to. And I don't mean to make it sound like that's how it always was when I left, because I would often find, like, throughout my career, anytime I took a day off and came back, it was a disaster. Like, I got bad reports from subs all the time, and like my classroom would be a mess. So it was not like that. Like, I'm not making any sort of commentary on what my classroom was always like and what my experience, being out was like, because I know it does not always go well. But in this particular situation, when I knew that I needed several weeks off and I had this long-term sub, that was the experience, that they were able to keep going even without me. And that felt really good. But, that's a pretty serious thing to have to take a month off of work for your mental health. So I was medicated during that time, and I felt pretty good for a while. And then I ended up going off my medication for bipolar disorder around 2010. So this was right after my husband and I had gotten married, and I knew that we would want to try to get pregnant sometime soon. So under my doctor's supervision, I slowly weaned myself off of that medication and managed my mental health just through mindset work. And that's when I first started writing the first edition of Awakened, because I was so deep in it, and I had to be, because I no longer had the medication to help me. Like, it was all on my thoughts at that point, if I was going to keep myself together. And I was just doing so much research and so much experimentation and learning from what worked and what didn't, that I wanted to write about it and share it with other people. So, so I managed. In retrospect, I think I would have felt a lot better with the meds. But, when you're trying to conceive, most of those drugs are not safe for pregnancy. And so I kind of felt like I was making a choice between my own mental health and trying to have a kid, which is just, it's a terrible choice. So that went on for like 10 years that I was off of medication. And then, as I shared in 2020, at the beginning of the pandemic, like, my anxiety was just off the charts. And I realized at that point, we're not trying to conceive anymore. We've kind of already made peace with the fact that, we're not going to do IVF, and therefore I'm not actively trying to get pregnant. I had entered premenopause at that point, which, by the way, side note, I'm going to do a whole episode on that too, on hormonal changes as you age and how that impacts your work, how that impacts your ability to show up in education. I'm trying to get this one particular guest that I hope I can get to talk about it, because I think perimenopause, which is the phase before actual menopause. That's normally what women hit in their 40s and then their 50s. They may be menopausal. It definitely has a big impact on your sleep, on your moods, on your energy levels. And I think that's something that we should be talking about openly and without shame in education. So, yeah, I'm going to come back to that at some point. But, in 2020, we weren't trying to conceive. I was premenopausal, so I knew the chances of me conceiving naturally were now even much lower. And so there was really nothing stopping me from getting back on medications. And I realized I should have been doing this a long time ago. As soon as we figured out that we were trying to get pregnant, I should have gone back on medication. But it took something just highly stressful, I think, like the pandemic, to kind of push me back into it. So as of now, as I shared before, I'm only on an anti-anxiety med, nothing else, nothing for bipolar. I don't really know what my diagnosis is. Not really worried about it. I feel really good with what I'm on. My doctor, I'm only under the care of a primary care physician. And he's told me, you can go off of this stuff. You don't have to be on this for the rest of your life. But I'm like, I feel good. And I kind of don't want to mess with that, I feel like now I am, I've really done so much mindset work, because that's really important. I don't think you can medicate your way out of anxiety and depression altogether. I think, your thoughts matter a lot. And I also think that, trying to do it with just mindset work and not doing with medication is harder. And as I shared in the second edition of Awakened, the two in combination is what works best for me. And that, of course, there's also structural and institutional issues as well. If there's external stressors in your life, that medication, it may not be enough. Mindset work may not be enough. There's some real stuff happening in the world that can deeply impact your mental health. So I also don't want to paint this picture of just pop a pill, or, just think positive thoughts and you'll be fine. Because it's not that simple. But that's where I'm at with it now, is not really claiming any kind of diagnosis, but just being on this anti-anxiety medication that I think really helps. I feel pretty good. And then again, I just do a lot of work with managing my mindset. I do yoga, a little bit of meditation. Meditation is kind of hard for me. I don't know. I haven't really found my groove with it yet. I'm still, everyone who meditates pretty much has started off that way. They all say in the beginning, it was so hard, I couldn't do it, I didn't like it. And then it grows on you. Well, I haven't gotten really to that place yet. I'm just kind of not there, but I got enough other practices that support my mental health that I feel like helps. So so that's the mental health stuff. Moving on to the next question. It is, hi, Angela. I love all you do, and I loved your 3-part series on the podcast this summer. Thank you very much. Would you consider doing an episode about how teachers can work alongside administrators who don't share in the 40-hour teacher workweek vision? I'm talking about the administrators who routinely expect overworking as part of the job, and some colleagues too. So, yes, so this is shifting more now into professional stuff versus, personal questions. I am planning an episode this fall, based on why bell-to-bell teaching doesn't work and the research behind it. And that was something that during the 40-hour teacher workweek online summit over the summer, I noticed that when I was interacting with people in the chat during the live sessions, folks were saying, yes, kids need breaks. Yes, kids need, all these different things, but my administrators don't get it. My administrators want us to be hammering them with academic practice from the second that first bell rings until the bell at the end of class. They want every minute to be packed in with learning. And neuroscience just doesn't back that up. That's not how humans learn. You cannot sit there, especially as a child, and focus and do deep work and concentrate and make the most of every single minute all day long, every single day. That's not best practice. So I'm planning to pull out some of the research on that so that folks can share this with stakeholders who maybe question the idea of, why are we doing brain breaks? Or, why are we allowing some of this off-task behavior? Why are we, maybe talking about soft skills a little bit more instead of just always going straight into the curriculum and focusing on academic stuff. So I'm going to be working on that, which I think kind of speaks a little bit to this question. And then in terms of the administrators who routinely expect overworking. So here's my thing on this. I doubt that the administrators who expect teachers to work long hours unpaid are doing so because they have never heard of self-care or work-life balance. I think boundaries at work, quiet quitting, I mean, these things have been part of the cultural zeitgeist for, years now, and especially since the pandemic. And certainly anyone who's been following my work has heard the ideas and research that I've been sharing about the 40-hour programs. That's been going on since 2015. So if a school leader doesn't buy in at this point and doesn't protect their faculty's time and energy, I think they either don't want to or they don't know how to. And again, there's so many resources already to support folks in both camps to help them see a better path and give them practical tools to streamline. I mean, I have the 40-hour leadership program, for example. There's lots of resources out there. I mean, there's tons of administrators who are talking about how to support their staff. I've seen everything from Twitter chats to books to PD, conference sessions. Like there's tons and tons of administrators talking about, teacher retention. If nothing else, is like, how do we keep our teachers? Well, if you don't, work them too much and expect them to spend too much time and money out of their own pocket to prop up an underfunded system, then you can keep them. Like, I think that message is out there for the folks who actually want it. So I think my advice here is actually going to return to that whole train leaving the station metaphor that I talked about at the beginning of this episode, where you do what's best for you and you don't wait for everyone else to get on board. If you wait for everyone else to get on board with the work-life balance train, you will be standing at the station and arguing with people until the end of time. Get on the train and go in the direction that you need to go in. And you will have other people on board with you. It won't be you alone, and you'll pick up more people at each station. But you got to just get on the train and go. And if your administrators or your colleagues don't get it, and they're making your work boundaries impossible, which I know is a real thing, not to sound trite, but pretty much every school in the country is hiring right now. Go find a school leader who gets it. There are a lot of them who get it. A lot. And growing. Every year there's more who get it. Find some place that will appreciate your gifts and talents and not feel like they need to suck the life out of you and use you up after a few years and have you move on and then replace you with someone new. That's just not the model. That's not sustainable. And I actually think teachers voting with their feet is powerful. The teacher attrition rates at schools are really carefully monitored at the district level and at the state level. So administrators who have a higher than average amount of teachers quitting, they do have their practices examined more closely. Why is this school, and then there's a school that's a half a mile down the road, one had 30% of their staff quit, one only had, 5% of their staff quit. Something's wrong there because they have the same demographics, the same resources, the same curriculum. There's something going on in the school culture there. And that kind of thing is absolutely examined at the district level in many, many places. Obviously, I can't speak for every single area, but people are paying attention to that. And administrators talk to each other. They know which leaders are attracting the best teachers. They know where the schools have high morale. They tell stories just like teachers tell stories. So I think that visionary school leaders who really work to humanize their staff and their students will, in the end, get better results in terms of student learning because they attract and keep the best teachers. And that, to me, means that the other schools will begin to follow their lead. Schools are always looking at what are other schools doing that is working. There's this competition. You don't want to fall behind, right? And it's not just in test scores. I think that teacher attrition is going to become something that is increasingly looked at. And if we see teachers leaving a school, then what's happening in that school is not working. In the same way that we can look at a school and say, okay, the test scores are down, something here is not working. And again, it's not, this cut and dry, someone is doing something wrong. There's a lot of different factors that go into both test scores and teacher attrition. But if we have a school that is continually losing a ton of teachers over and over every single year, I think those school leaders will either be replaced or will be asked to do something different. And they're going to be looking towards the ones who are able to retain awesome teachers. This is a shifting paradigm for education, but I do think it's possible. I do think it's happening. And I think there's never been a better time to find a teaching job that fits your needs. So if you're not being supported where you're at, know that there are good schools out there. And I hear from teachers all the time who love their principals. They feel like their parents and their community support them. They have great relationships with their students. It's not a utopia, But there are definitely places where you can work that you feel supported. And even in my own experience, changing schools within the same district, the morale is completely different depending on who's in charge. And, there was one particular time when I transferred from a school where I was not vibing with the principal to a school that had a fantastic leader. And my personal and professional growth during the years that I had that leader was just unbelievable. I loved teaching so much more. It relit a spark in me. So if you feel like you're working for an admin who just doesn't get it, and does not want to get it, because I do think that's the case now at this point, if we're still not paying attention to retaining teachers and supporting them and helping them find a sustainable way to do their job, and then they're not taking advantage of the right resources, and they're not sharing in your vision. They clearly have a different vision for what your job should be. So find a school where you have a good vision. So I will end with one final question. This was from a New York City listener who said, beyond putting this hope out into the universe and sharing it with you, I wanted to ask, as someone connected to many justice and activist groups and organizations in the city, if you have any desire to get involved in our local work to make the NYC schools more equitable, culturally responsive, and democratic. Your voice is so powerful and we need all hands on deck. Let me know if you have any desire to get involved, and I'm happy to connect you to folks who will find ways your unique gifts can serve the fight for education justice in NYC and beyond. So because this was an anonymous Google form, there was no way to get the person's email address. So whoever sent that question, please reach out to me via email. It's Angela@truthforteachers.com. Yes, I would love to get more involved in the local work there. And then also, as I've shared with you all, I'm splitting my time between Brooklyn and the Poconos. So if you are in Eastern Pennsylvania, absolutely, I would love to connect with folks and organizations doing work there as well. I feel like I'm entering a phase of life or a season of life where I'm going to have more capacity for local work, and I would love to do more systemic stuff. What I'm doing here with you all is very much individualistic, right? It's about your mindset, your practices, what's going on in your classroom, because I believe in the power of the individual. I believe in the power of one conscious, purposeful teacher creating a ripple effect through their students' families, through their colleagues, through their district. I've experienced it. I know that works, but I also know that there is strength in numbers, and that systemic change comes when we band together. And I also know that this isn't work that has to be started from scratch, that there's tons of folks out there already doing this good work that maybe don't get the press, maybe don't get the coverage, maybe we don't know that it's happening. I've learned to stop saying, how come no one's doing this? Or how come no one's talking about this? And instead ask, how can I find the people who are doing that work? Because it is happening. And, joining existing movements rather than trying to start your own is definitely the way to go. You want to support people who've been doing this work for a long time. So systemic efforts are not things that I personally have a lot of experience with. For a lot of different factors. All right, let's just go ahead and talk about it since I'm doing this long rambling episode off the cuff about myself, right? For one thing, I'm white, right? And white folks tend to be more individualistic. We don't have a collective culture like, say, African-American folks or Japanese culture, right? So we have especially in America, we have a very individualistic culture. Me being an only child, I think contributes to that. I've learned from a young age to do things myself. I create things myself. I envision them myself, and I do them myself. And I'm very comfortable with that. I love that. That's how I work best. Being an introvert, I think factors into that. Like working with groups tends to exhaust me. Working alone energizes me. So there's a lot of different reasons that I have not been more involved in systemic and institutional change. I like to amplify the voices of people who do that work by having them on my podcast, by sharing their stuff on social media, by letting folks know about their books and things like that. That's more of the way that I approach it. But I do think that I can be involved in that. And I think it will be good for me to push myself, particularly in my local community, because so much of what's happening right now, I think in our country, we're constantly looking at national politics, right? Like the local has become national. And I think it's easier for us to look to like, what are the controversial things happening in the state far away that I have zero influence and control over? I cannot vote in that election. I cannot do anything. And then I ignore what's happening in my own community because maybe it's not as sensationalized. It's not hitting the same, it's not getting the same level of press coverage. But the local work is where this stuff happens. And so as much as I say to you all, one individual teacher in your school can make this great, powerful change, I think when it comes to creating the world that we want to live in and that we want our students to grow up in, the work really needs to happen at the local level because there's only so much influence you can have at the national level, particularly when you have a full-time job as an educator, right? Like if you're an activist or an organizer, great, absolutely, we need those folks. But you've already got your hands full with teaching. And I think the best thing that you can do is show up in your school as an advocate for the things that that you believe and that you know are right for kids. And I would like to do the same thing in my role and take part in some of these organizations that are fighting for this kind of stuff because I have a platform and I also have some time and energy that I can devote to those kinds of things and to try to stretch myself a little bit to do more of this collective work that I know is so, so important, but that just doesn't come naturally to me. It's outside of my comfort zone. So yes to this person and yes also to anyone else who is local in this area and would like me to know about the work that they're doing in their organization, and I'll see what I can do to support. Thank you for being here. It has felt so good to be able to just share a little bit more about me and to let you get to know me a bit better. I feel much more connected to you all, and I hope you feel the same back. Have a great week. You can do this. And remember, it's not going to be easy. It's going to be worth it.